All right, so before we get into today's episode, I want to say a few things. All right, so before we get into today's episode, I want to put y'all on to something. I had a moment this week, a moment I wasn't expecting. One of those ordinary moments that becomes something else entirely. Not while it's happening, but later on. When the room gets quiet and you finally realize what you were actually in the middle of. I've been sitting with this one for a few days, turning it over, trying to understand something so simple. And the way it hit me as deeply as it did, I think this one needed to be an episode because I don't think what I felt belongs to only me. You see, my wife, she started this routine in our house. We take the kids to the library and then we make an event out of the whole thing, picking out books, bringing them home, reading them, then returning them so we could do it all over again. So the other day, I looked at my son and said, "Come on, it's book time." Nothing dramatic, nothing planned, just me deciding right then that I was going to carve out this moment with him. So we sat on the couch, two library books, and we read together. We talked about dinosaurs, beaches, colors, shapes, shoes. We laughed, and he asked me a whole lot of questions. You know me, I went off on a few tangents. I couldn't help it because that's what I do. But in the moment, I was just a father reading to his son. That's all I thought it was. Then we finished the books. He looked up at me and said, "I like my story, Dad." And I looked down at him and said, "Me too. Me too, son. We'll read more tomorrow, okay?" I thought that was the end of the moment, but it wasn't. Because a few moments later, when everything got quiet, I started thinking to myself, what just happened? Something hit me, something I couldn't shake. Somewhere inside those two books, something unlocked. I thought I was just reading two books to my son. I didn't realize that the boy that I used to be was sitting there listening too. That's what this episode is about. Welcome to Word Forward, y'all, where we build structured clarity in this noisy world together. I'm your host, Damien J. Branch, and this is episode 20. And I want to say something clearly right now. Before I go any further, this episode isn't about blame. It's not about what I missed. I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty about their past. Not mine, not yours, not anybody's. But I have to be honest about something just so I can get to what I'm trying to say. I didn't have a father that read to me on the couch. I didn't have a father that carved out a Tuesday afternoon just because we hadn't had a lot of time together lately. A lot of us I know didn't have that. That same dad that sat down when we sat down, who made us feel like nothing outside that moment mattered more. I needed that in ways I couldn't explain at the time, because when you never had something, you don't always know how to name what's missing. You just feel it, as a kind of weight that just sits on your heart, a missing piece to your own puzzle, a question that you really can't quite put into words. And for a long time, that was just how it was. Something I carried, something I had to work around. And I told myself that it had turned into a strength, because what else I'm going to do with that? But sitting there on the couch, I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't checking any boxes. I was just present, patient, reading, because my son wanted me to. And that was more than enough reason. But somewhere inside that ordinary afternoon, the little boy that I used to be recognized all of that. That quiet, unhurried recognition. That's what broke the levee in my eyes. And I've been thinking about what those tears actually meant. Because I think that we were taught that tears, especially for men, is evidence of weakness or breakdown, something that we have to recover from quickly so we can just get back to being okay. But that's not what those tears were. I think it was just pressure releasing. Years of it. The grief, the gaps, the weight of carrying life without a teacher. and that thing finally gets a signal, right? And you can't let it go. Healing doesn't always look like what we expect it to look like. It doesn't always sit like therapy or a breakthrough moment or some kind of clean resolution where everything suddenly all of a sudden makes sense and those old wounds can close perfectly. Sometimes healing looks like a regular Tuesday afternoon on the couch while your child is picking out books, you sitting down next to them and being, without even realizing it, the exact presence that the younger version of you spent years trying to find. Think about a car running on a blocked exhaust. The engine still works, the car will still move, and from the outside, everything looks functionable. But internally, the pressure is building up. The gases have nowhere to go. And over time, that pressure starts affecting everything else. Those tears were like the exhaust finally clearing out. Years of unexpected grief, unprocessed longing, finding its way out. And it wasn't pain. It was just through recognition. The recognition that something important was just revealed right in front of you in the form of the person that you had quietly become. That's the sound of a man finally exhaling something that he's been holding on to ever since he was a kid. And here's the one thing that I've been sitting with. Since that afternoon, I realized that there were 3 people in that living room. My son, who just wanted to read books with his dad. Me, the father that was present in that moment, choosing the time on the couch, choosing to lock in with my son, choosing to make that afternoon all about him. And then the little boy who grew up without any of that. He was somewhere sitting in the corner of the room, watching and finally getting to see what it was supposed to look and feel like. I think that happens more than people actually realize. That moment that you give your child something that you never had, you're not just parenting forward. In that same moment, you're healing backwards. You became the answer to that prayer that the younger version of you didn't know how to even say yet. And this is where the title of the episode, it gets bigger than just fatherhood. Because you might be hearing this right now as a daughter, thinking about the mother she needed, or somebody who grew up without that patient teacher, a steady mentor, a protector, an adult who told them, you are worth believing in. You know, whatever shape that absence took in your life, the question underneath that will always be the same. Did you become that for somebody else? Or are you waiting until you feel ready? Because here's what I know now. You can't give what you were never given. You can only give what you decide to grow into. See, there's a pattern that I notice in the people who grew up without someone that they actually needed in their life. Some of those people will repeat the cycle. It's not because they're bad people. It's because those patterns, they're powerful. And we all default to what we know, even when we hate what we know. And some of us can break that pattern. It's not because you figured the perfect way to show up. It's not because you had all the right tools. It's not because some mentor just arrived in your life and then showed you exactly what you're supposed to do. It's because at some point they made a quiet, unannounced decision that whatever they didn't receive, somebody near them would. And then they start building from scratch, using their gap as their blueprint. Not the wounds, the gap itself. The wound is just what happened to you. The gap is the space where something was supposed to be, and it wasn't. And that gap, it usually tells you exactly what you need to build, because you know better than anyone else how it feels to know that that thing is missing. And that knowledge, that specific hard-won, you don't choose to learn it knowledge, is one of the most powerful building tools we could ever have, especially if you're willing to use it forward. Intentional legacy, that's not about leaving something behind. It's about becoming something for someone right now while you're still alive. You see, I want to ask y'all something. Who did you need and haven't become yet? Not when you're more healed, Not after you figured yourself out completely. Not when you finally feel ready. Because that feeling isn't going to show up before you start. It shows up after you already started. There's somebody in your life right now, probably most likely someone you already love, who's quietly carrying the same weight that you carry, looking for the same kind of presence that you once looked for, needing the same kind of love and patience, that unhurried attention that you always needed, but you never received. They're probably not going to ask for that out loud. They're going to carry it quietly inside the same way you did, in those questions that they can't quite form just yet. The real question is whether you're going to show up before they end up learning to stop expecting you to show up. I'm not saying you have to be a perfect parent. None of us are. And I'm not saying that you have to completely heal yourself before you give that a try. I'm saying that your couch is available right now. The books, they're there. The person that needs you to sit down with them, they're waiting for you. You don't have to have it all together just to show up. You just have to show up. When I thought I was just reading 2 books to my son, I didn't realize the boy that I used to be was sitting in the room listening to us. And something had to let go. Years of weight I was carrying. Stuff I didn't know how to put down. I finally got to see what those moments are supposed to look like. Not as a child who needed it, though. As the man who became that for someone else. So let me bring this one home, y'all. I want you to hear something before we close this out. This isn't just an episode about parenting. This is an episode about what happens when you quietly, without ceremony, without a plan, without even realizing that you're in that moment, become the person that the younger version of you was always looking for. And that can happen anywhere. In the kitchen, in a conversation, over the phone, in the same way that you show up for somebody. When showing up just might cost you something, but you do it anyway. Intentional legacy isn't always about leaving an inheritance when you're gone. It's about becoming something for somebody right now. You don't need to be completely healed to help someone else. Sometimes, and most times, you'll heal each other at the same time. On the couch, reading books, not knowing what you're actually in the middle of. And if this episode hit, I want you to share this with somebody that's been carrying things alone for a long time. Someone that might need reminding that they already became the answer. Follow Word Forward on all platforms, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and drop a comment and tell me something. Who did you need? And when did you realize you quietly became that person that you always needed? I want to read every single one of those, and you know I'm going to respond back. The inner circle is in the description, so we can touch more on this topic. This is Word Forward, y'all. I'll see you in the next one.